here with Mike LaTulip, who I'm so excited to have on the show with the Field of 68 basketball analyst and the Illini Inquirer. That's right. Mike, thank you for coming on the show.
No, I appreciate you, man. No, I hopped on. I said, I feel like we know each other, even though we just kind of met on here, but Twitter, X, it's a powerful thing.
Brad Underwood, to me, is one of the most interesting characters and coaches in the country because of, stylistically, there can be extremes and he can be ahead of the curve on some things. I think he is so smart, and I think there's a lot of interesting things he did this year. And obviously the Balkan 5 is one of the headlines, but it's hard to retain players in this era. You bring back Tommy Visic, you bring back Hummercast, you bring back Colin Boswell, you bring in Stojakovic and Big Z in the transfer portal, and then an interesting freshman in Keaton Wagler and another guy as well, and then Petravic and Mirovich. So overall, how would you just assess what Brad Underwood did this offseason and kind of just his mindset and approach to this season?
Yeah, I like it. And I think you hit on a point that's really important, because what Brad's done over the years is really be able to mold his style around the personnel. I mean, if you think back to the way they played when he first came in, where it was just, we're going to deny everything. If you want to back cut us, great. We're going to pressure you. And then he shifted because they got Kofi. And then when they got Kofi, it's play more drop coverage. It was, we're going to throw into the post. We're going to play 4 out, 1 in. And then, the following year he has Coleman Hawkins at the 5, and they run a lot more 5 out. The following year he has Marcus Damask. Even though you have Terrence Shannon, who's an NBA draft pick and maybe the second best player in college basketball, how are we going to mold this around our personnel? We're going to go into back downs, or, I hate using the phrase booty ball, but booty ball with Marcus Damask. And then, last year it was a lot of middle pick and roll, high ball screens, because you had KJ. And then as the season went on, we really want to utilize Visic's passing ability. So we're going to use him as a 5 out hub and fulcrum. He's just been able to shapeshift no matter what the roster is, no matter what the personnel is. And I think that just this year, once again, I love the blend of guys that he's brought in. We'll dig into each piece, but there's a few things that really excite me. The optionality with the personnel, particularly in the front court. I think we've seen in college basketball this shift to having 2 bigs. Now you need a good backcourt. That's kind of a misnomer. It's like, hey, get 2 bigs. It's like, you don't have guards. It doesn't matter. And just the overall retention that you mentioned. Because last year was a complete overhaul. There were guys getting to campus at different times, guys arriving in July and August, and all of a sudden it's bang, bang, the season starts. You had a much more solidified core coming into this offseason. And coming into the summer session and into the fall session. So I think that's going to pay dividends. And I guess the last thing that I'll mention is just the experience. He wanted to get older this year. It's what brought them to an Elite 8 2 years ago. And I think last year there was too much of a learning curve for that young group to have consistent success. And I think he wanted to get back to getting old. And I think he feels that that's going to give them the best chance to come out of the gate strong and advance further in March.
So we've got a super talented roster here. Let's start with Tommy Visic, as you mentioned, like functioning as a hub at the top of the key. He was so good last year. He's got such a quick release on his 3-point shot. The post game, I expect, some more strides there. How high is his ceiling in terms of, is this a first team all Big Ten guy potentially? And how do you expect him to function within the offense and defensively?
Yeah, I mean, the Big Ten's really good this year. You look at that potential preseason first team all Big Ten team, and it's Braden Smith, it's Donovan Dent, it's Bennett Sturts, it's Yaxel Lindenberg, and it's Trey Coffin-Wren. So if you were going to have 5, but Tommy's one of the best bigs in the country. I wouldn't say just the Big Ten. I think he's one of the best bigs in the country. When you look at last year, he was roughly 14-8, positive assist to turnover ratio at 7-1, tasked with a lot of responsibility at the top of that key as that hub, and made strides as a defender. I mean, he still close to a block and a half a game. But just the understanding he has and the passing ability, the understanding of angles, the touch that he has, he throws guys open. He recognizes whether or not the pass needs to be a bounce pass, likely coming from a guy cutting from the corner, or a pass over the top, a guy cutting from the slot. And he just really picked that up. It unlocked Will Riley when they shifted to that later in the year. It unlocked Trey White. And there's just a number of guys, Andrei Stojakovic being one of them, that I think can really benefit from playing in that spot. So he's somehow still underrated. I think if he were to go into the portal, he would have been one of the top 3 bigs in the portal. Truly, the way he spaces the floor, I think he has a chance this year. He made 55 threes last year. I think he has a chance this year to hit close to 70, which at 7'1", that's a guy that when you factor in all the skill set that he has, like this is a potential NBA draft pick. And that's been the trend for this Illinois program, is after 15 years of having one NBA draft pick, they've had 4 in the last 4 years. So Tommy can fit that bill. He can be a guy that can be in the 2026 NBA draft. I really believe that. And he's just such an important piece when you talk about retention, because that just gives you such a foundation, because it gives you a style that you can play. And then defensively, played him in drop a lot last year. They mixed in some stabs later in the year. I think they want to force more turnovers this year. So where do you put him in ball screens, and that type of coverage is important, but he's just such a huge piece. I mean, anytime you have a guy at 7-1 who has, 5 or more games of 5 plus assists and 1 turnover or less, that's getting it done at a high level. He's a hell of a player.
Just opens up so much
for
the rest of the team. Another guy being retained that takes advantage of that floor spacing is Colin Boswell. Colin Boswell is a player who at Arizona, I saw some flashes where I'm like, whoa, like this guy is incredible. And then that sophomore year, we're all expecting that jump, and you see it in flashes, but there's just times where either he just couldn't make a shot, or he seemed to disappear, or his confidence just seemed shaky. And then at Illinois, it was a little up and down. There's just some moments where it's just like, this guy just cannot buy a 3, but we know it's in him. But especially at the end of the season, the way he was attacking the basket and guarding, I thought he was fantastic. I was watching more of his film last night. So tell me, do you expect a leap from Colin Boswell? Do you expect that 3-point shot to return, or what do you think his approach to the offseason has been? And he's a leader on this team, I assume.
He is. And yes to the 2 questions you asked. I do expect a leap. I do expect more shots to fall this year. We just talked about Tommy and Kylan, and I understand Will and KJ were 2 NBA draft picks in June, but these were their 2 most consistent players, and especially in March. I mean, in the month of March, when, as you know, it matters the most, Kylan was 18 a game, 18, 4 and 4. I mean, that's just at the high major level, I mean, that's getting it done at a really, really high level. And, he's a guy that shot in the high 30s at Arizona from 3. And I think he just had to get used to playing a little bit of a different role, really being, and not that he wasn't used to being off ball at Arizona. I mean, you play with Caleb Love, you're going to be off ball a little bit. But the spacing was something that I think was new for him, because Ballo's not in the paint anymore. You have wide open paint to where you can cut. Him and Tommy developed a really good chemistry, just like Will Riley, where even in just very, the improvisation of secondary transition, where you have a throwback to Tommy at the top of the key, and it's like, I'm gonna go screen away. Nope, I'm slipping to the basket, and Tommy just lobs it up towards the rim. There was a really great play they had in that Kentucky game in the round of 32 that was just like that. And look, I think he was a little bit deferential to KJ last year too. I think he can walk in that locker room this year as a guy that's year 2 in the program and say, this is my team. And that doesn't mean that you're the highest volume shooter or any of that, but there's a certain command that you take, especially being a point of attack defender, that I think he exudes. And I think guys follow that. And he's the perfect, when you talk about pillars that you want to bring back, Tommy certainly being one of them, because the 5 spot's so important in college basketball, but a guy that can be malleable at the guard spot, where it's like we can count on him as a point of attack defender, but he can play off ball. He can play on ball. The thing that was most impressive about Kylan last year was in 2 years at Arizona, he shot 58 free throws. Last year, he shot 143.
Yeah.
And it just unlocked. I think it allowed him to settle in a little bit more, because if he wasn't doing that, now you really fall down the psychological spiral of missing shots from the outside. He could keep his confidence on the offensive end because he was able to balance it with getting into the free throw line. So definitely want to see more of that, or at least have that remain consistent this year for him. But just such an important piece for this team. And I think he's just, when I watched him at Arizona and when he committed to Illinois, I was like, that's just a Brad Underwood guy. he just is. I mean, he's willing to die out there on the floor. And I think guys that permeates through the locker room. That's going to permeate for, with this personnel of guys that are certainly coming back, but certainly new faces that are going to look to him for leadership.
Next, I want to get into Andre Stojakovic. watched him a decent. I watched him more than most people probably did last year at Cal, just because I was somewhat intrigued by him and Jeremiah Wilkinson, and Cal played some fun games. Stojakovic is obviously just this pro level scorer, the way that he can create for himself, but there was just so much pressure on him because of the environment he was in. And now with just this pace and spacing, I'm really excited to see what he can do. He really can do everything at 6'7". How do you see him fitting into this team? And can you speak to just how much easier it is for a guy like that to get his when all eyes aren't on him at all times?
Yeah, I just go back to that Cal team, and again with Avicic, I mean, it was Lee Dort and Matty Sissoko.
Yeah,
those are non-spacers. Those are guys that you really don't even want outside of maybe DHOs and screens and dives to the basket. That's pretty much all you want them doing offensively. And I just think for Andres being able to play fast, he was really good in transition. He was a guy that got to the line. He shot almost 7 free throws a game. And that's something that I think they're going to be able to utilize this year. They're going to be better defensively than they were at Illinois is going to be better defensively than Cal was. So that's going to allow them to get out and transition more. And I know stylistically, Illinois is going to run way more this year. They're going to play way faster this year. And that's only going to unlock some of that secondary transition for Andres. But even in the half court, there's two areas I think he can really flourish. And I think he can be I know he's 18 a game last year, but it's going to be different this year. I don't think he's going to hit that mark this year just because of the talent around him. But he can be a 15 a game guy on really strong efficiency because of where he's going to get his work. I think I talked about transition, getting to the free throw line, but part of that is when you play in that 5-out, that Will Riley spot where ball goes to the top of the key and that wing guy dives to the basket, that can be Andres. And even if he dives to the basket and nothing's there, I love posting him because at 6'7", a guy like they did with Marcus Damask, where he can handle it. He has a really strong base for not being like the thickest dude. So being able to post him to where we can get him to the free throw line even more is just another wrinkle you can have for this offense that I think is really special. Like I don't necessarily look at Stojakovic as this offensive engine. I don't think he is that. I think there were too many times last year where he was kind of indecisive with what he wanted to do, but one area for him that is really being overlooked is his defense. I think that, and when you have better defenders around you, that helps, Kylan Boswell being one of them. But I think he has a chance to be like a really high-level wing defender. I mean, dude, he had 7 blocks against Notre Dame last year. 7. Like there's guys that get 2-3 blocks in a game, and it's like, maybe you had a chase down and got your hand out. 7 blocks like that, you guys just don't stumble into that. And so I just look at him, the two-way ability from this year to be a dependable offensive player, not necessarily an offensive engine, but certainly a guy that, with Kylan taking probably the number one perimeter threat, a guy that can really, really make you pay guarding your second best offensive player. I think he can be that.
In the way that Illinois functions, being in that he's different from Will Riley, but I'm happy you made that comparison because it's like he's going to be in great positions to score. And also that strength that you mentioned, it is so deceptive because of his frame, but he's a matchup nightmare for a lot of guys at this level. You kind of mentioned it. Are we going to see some booty ball? Do you think like maybe not to Damask level, but like he's just tough to guard down there.
Yeah, and he had a lot of success with it. But they didn't do a ton with him at Cal last year. But at the times where he would kind of Barkley guys into the post, it was just really tough because you don't want to send 2 because he can see over the top and make passes. And then if it's an undersized guard or wing guarding him, you almost don't want to leave that guard or wing on an island. So it's just another wrinkle that you can have. Now, they really made it their offense with Damask. I think you have other pieces that to be a little bit more versatile offensively than to just rely on that. But I love it in opportunistically and with certain matchups, just really playing through him in that sense, not as necessarily like a break you down off the dribble guy. But yeah, no, you touched on it, man. Like, I think they were a top 3 offense in America when they had that with Damask. Now you got to have other guys willing to buy into the roles like a Terrence Shannon did. Terrence was totally cool with like, cool, man, I'll space in the half court. I'll cut off the ball, 45 cut, whatever you need me to do. That type of selflessness is needed when you have all these different offensive options. So yeah, it speaks to I think the pitch that they had to him, where it's like, hey man, these are all the things we can do with you, but the efficiency having that uptick is important for him too, especially when you talk about going to the next level, because he was a 32% 3-point shooter. He's been low 30s his 2 years in college basketball, but there's some mechanics I'm worried about with him. Some of like the guide hand stuff that's over the top of the ball. It's a very flat shot. So like, I don't think he can get into that like 42 plus range, but he'll get more open ones this year. And if he can be 37, 38%, that's a massive win for Illinois.
Tell me about Petravic. I don't know how to say his first name. What I do know is that he's 23 years old and he's been playing pro ball for a while, and he's a pure point guard. So how do you expect him to fit alongside Boswell? It's just hard for me I don't know what to expect when these guys are so old coming in. Yeah. They're just such mystery boxes. What have you been hearing about him?
Yeah, really successful in the Adriatic League. I mean, he was up there in the MVP voting for that league, which if you break down the European leagues, it's probably, you got EuroLeague, you got ACB, you got, probably you put France over it too. And it's probably the maybe 5th or 6th best league overseas, but he's a blur. He's a guy that I think is cut from almost that, Andre Curbelo type of cloth, where it's just, he wants to make the home run play, and he can really beat guys off the bounce. He's crafty around the rim. His outside shooting needs some work. So I think that there's some worry there when you think about teams playing against drop coverage. Can you really make a 5-man or 4-man that's in drop coverage honor you and your shot to be up to touch and not have to deep drop to where Tommy, if Tommy's rolling, he can't even really gain an advantage, or you can't gain an advantage on the backside because the backside tag man doesn't have to tag. So those are some things I think he's going to have to work through and find his way. But at a minimum, you have a guy that can change the pace, that can play up tempo. Defensively, he's cut from that. People say like Braden Smith, the ability to kind of like roam and not like you get your steals from roaming and jumping passing lanes. I call it the Angel Rodriguez. Because that was how Angel Rodriguez, made hay on the defensive end. And so that's how I see him fitting in. But I think highly of Petravic, but Keaton Waggler, man, we can get into it, but it's not as clear cut, I think, as people think in terms of who can potentially be that starting point guard. And Petravic too is a little bit behind the 8 ball. He got to campus like 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago. So he's got some stuff to learn, and it may take a little while before he gets his feet under him. And that may aid some of the other guys that have been there since the late spring, early summer.
Let's talk Keaton Waggler. I've seen the hype. 6'6" freshman who, from what I have acquired, he wasn't playing on like the top, like flashy circuits. So he like went a little under the radar, but I've heard Brad Underwood say some incredible things about how smart he is, how he processes, how good of a shooter he is. 6'6" point guard. Tell me about this kid that's getting this hype.
Let me ask you this, and I'm not even like putting you on the spot here. Have you seen anything from him?
Yes, I watched a video on him yesterday, but
okay. Synergy, and I figured this out on Synergy. For some reason, he's tagged as Keaton Wagner. That's why I was like, why isn't he on Synergy? And I finally found his stuff on Synergy because I typed in his high school and I kind of circumvented and back. And so when I really dove into it, it is crazy how under recruited he was. He's a pro. And I don't know if it's going to be this year or if he's like a one and done, but I think he's going to play in the NBA. He is so skilled. He shot 45% from 3 this past year. I think he was 58% from the field, 45 from 3, almost 5 assists a game, and just doing stuff off the bounce. And his high school team 2 years ago, they were 25-0, just swept their way to a state title. Last year, I think they ended up 22-3, also won a state title. Like, the dude's just a winner. I mean, these guys that, the Jalen Brunsons that come from, I say that because Jalen Brunson ended my high school career. Those guys that win in high school and take teams like Stevenson High School, where Jalen was at, was not like a state title contender. And he turned them into it. And I think that's what that's what Keaton did too. So his ability with his skill level, his size, the best way I can describe the way he plays, because it's very, there's just such a rhythm to it, but there's also a suddenness to it. Like he plays with sudden grace. I don't know, that's a very clashing description, but it's just the way he plays. And he's so heady, he makes good reads, he doesn't turn the ball over. I think at one point in the summer this year at Illinois, he was like 62 assists, 7 turnovers. Like it's something crazy like that, to where you trust him with the ball in his hands. And then, oh, by the way, he can go make something happen. He can go make plays off the bounce. He can make threes off the bounce. He can, and when I talk about playing against drop coverage, however you want to guard him, that gives more paranoia to that drop defender, to where I'm like, I can't fully drop back, because if my guy gets labeled on a screen, this dude just rising up hitting threes. So now it's like he gets up to touch, Tommy gets a lob to the rim, or Tommy gets a throwback, and then now you're in rotation. That all happens from a guy that can create that type of paranoia, and I think he can do that. And just like I think you just made the first pod that I've said this on, but look what Jace Richardson did for Michigan State last year. Like we had Jace Richardson as like, hey, Jason Richardson's kid, maybe he'll be pretty good. And we think about Michigan State a certain way. They have a pretty high floor, and then he just burst them through that ceiling, because he was so dependable in playing in a balanced system like I think Illinois is going to be this year. I don't think Keaton Wagler's going to have gaudy numbers by any means, but Keaton Wagler's a pro. So yeah, I can't really say enough about him. I know like the hype, it's almost like they've been trying to like tame the hype, because he's from Kansas. He was under recruited, but I think he's in for a really impactful year. I expect like 18-7 from him, but he's just going to impact winning at a really, really high level.
Just looks so smooth to me.
Yeah.
Just so smooth. And I read that he like just wanted to stay with the same coach. Like it was like a former Oklahoma State player or something. It's just interesting to me as someone who's not super tapped into high school basketball, like how a guy like that who's getting these rave reviews now, and even though you say that the hype is somewhat tempered, that how he can go so under the radar when you watch him, when it just kind of sticks out like this kid's really, really good.
Yeah, I mean we've seen it over the years. I mean, like I almost wanted to give Nick Clifford as an example, but Nick Clifford started at Colorado. So like there's certain guys that, I mean, and again, I'm not comparing him to John Morant, but like you watch John Morant and you're like, how does this guy end up at Murray State? It's just, it's guys like that I think, because I had coaches that I know that were more at like the high mid-major level that were texting me about him when he committed to Illinois, and they were like, God damn, like they were pissed because they were hoping to get him to commit before the big dogs came in. And I just think, again, he looks and sees just the way that Brad Underwood's really molded and given the keys. I mean, he gave the keys to KJ last year willingly. I mean, he's done it with Curbelo. He's done it with, I mean, if you can play and you can impact winning, I mean, Underwood's not going to dim your light. I mean, I think the one blemish is probably Brandon Pajemski, but that's a totally different scenario there. So I think I'm excited about Keaton for sure.
A few other names to hit on. Kous. He's back. I wasn't sure if he was going to be able to come back. Only shot 34% from deep last year, but there were a few games where you saw the high level of shooting from him in this another year in the system and in the talent around him. That spot up shooting, I feel like, is a huge need. And I feel like he's a guy that can take a big jump, right? What do you think about him this year?
I think he might be their starting 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people could hear that and be like, kind of underwhelming last year. But to me, he was such a victim of the hype. I mean, there were guys saying like next Dalton Connect. And even I'm watching this stuff, I'm like, I don't see that. That doesn't mean he can't be a good player. And it's really unfair to the kid too. Because like you come in with all these expectations, and it's a guy that was playing NAIA 2 years ago that then went to Evansville. And now he's at Illinois in this pressure cooker environment where I was there. And if you're not playing well, like when I went to Wright State and I had a bad game, there was nothing on social media. Like nobody was like, dude, you suck. You don't deserve the jersey. Illinois, you have a bad game there. I mean, it's what makes that fan base so amazing. But that takes some getting used to. I didn't think he was confident last year. And it didn't take until like later in the season he started to find himself a little bit. But he had some pretty explosive games. I mean, the Penn State game, I think he ended up with 24 points or whatever it was. He can score, and he's really smart. He's not like the quickest guy in the world, but he's very smart positionally, defensively. He knows where to be, what spots to be in. That's half the battle. I think he's just a really valuable, older, experienced piece for this team that you just see across college basketball. Those guys that are picking pop fours, that are really smart and high IQ, they're the connective tissue to a lot of your lineups, especially floor spacers. So I think he can be that. I'm expecting, a really, really strong second-year leap for him. And I think it just speaks to, and again, I know we're doing an Illinois preview, and I went to Illinois, and I don't want to make it seem like this guy's going to be amazing. This guy's going to be amazing. This guy's going to be amazing. But I think really highly of this team, and they're a lot easier to forecast than last year's team was. Mm-hmm. Last year's team was like, I don't know, a whole new cast of characters, guys from overseas, a bunch of guys first time in America, like not a lot of proof of concept around college basketball. This year, I think there's much more of a good grasp on it, because not only do you have proven commodities that were playing college basketball like Stojakovic, you have proven commodities that have done it at Illinois that can take that next step. And I think Kous is one of those guys as well.
Another big that can shoot it, Tommy's brother, Big Z's Mirovich coming in. He is interesting to me. There's like something a little just goofy about him. I don't know if it's his facial expressions when he plays, but like the shot blocking and the 3-point shooting is very, very high level. Like when he comes in, I don't know if he'll play with his brother at the same time at any point, but when he is there at the 5, that spacing is maintained because he is a fantastic 3-point shooter. And then in terms of the drop coverage that Illinois wants to play, that's a big body to be able to finish over as well. He's at least an inch taller than Tommy, right? But what are expectations for Big Z here coming in?
Yeah, Big Z's interesting because, again, I talked about at the top of the show that I love their optionality in the front court, because it's really something that this depth they have between the twins and Mirovich and Kous, and it's just something they haven't really had. The front court's always been kind of thin for them. Last year, even with Kofi, I mean, they had Georgie that was, Georgie was solid, but that's kind of where the line was. Like, that was it. They had 2 bigs. And then last year was kind of like, they kind of had 2 bigs. It was just Tommy and Merez. And now I think they just have so many different ways they can play. And for Big Z, he's interesting because I think he'll spend most of his time backing up Tommy at the 5. I don't know if that's going to come in the form of like 15 minutes a game or maybe 20 on some nights, but there's just certain things for him where, he's not as high level of a processor offensively as Tommy is. And because of, he has some really bad habits defensively, unbelievable. His rim protection is about as good as anybody's in the country per, when you look at the advanced stuff. And, but off the ball, he gets lost off the ball. Some of the stuff in ball screen coverage, where when to help, when not to help, when to make a attempt at a block shot, when not to, like, those are the stuff I think that's the stuff he struggles with. And then, can you play in a very, at Arkansas and even at Kentucky, it's like, it's a dribble drive offense, just kind of space the floor. There's not a ton of like movement and processing and first read, multi-read stuff where, you can't be a guy that is a ball stopper or just kind of holds things up because you can't process at a high level. So that's some of the stuff I worry about for him, but it's certainly tantalizing to see a guy at 7'2" be able to move the way he does. And I think this kind of bakes into the conversation with Tommy as well, is, how often can either of them punish mismatches down low to get to the free throw line? They're both solid free throw shooters, or can be solid free throw shooters. And I think if Tommy's going to take that next step, he's going to have to start doing that. And Z, that's not really maybe going to be his game. I wonder where he fits in this group, because there's so many guys that can, there's good spacers on this team like Z is. I just don't know. I don't think he's a 25-minute a game guy. I think there's a diminishing returns there, but certainly in 15 to 17 minutes, maybe even 13 minutes on some nights, I think he can be impactful in that kind of, truncated amount of time. So he's the one guy that I look at and just, I wonder about the fit, but I also wonder if the system kind of accentuates the abilities that he has.
The other front court guy off the bench, likely David Mirovich, another one of these Balkan guys. What do I expect from him? Is he as old as Petravic?
No, he's younger. I think
he's a true freshman.
I want to say he's 19.
Okay.
So he's more of a freshman than Petravic. Certainly more of a freshman than Tomislav was last year. But Mirovich, he played in the Hoop Summit game, and he came in for like a 4-minute stretch and just like flipped the game because he just knows how to play, and he knows who he is, and there's so much value in that. He doesn't feel like he has to put the ball on the deck and give you like a dribbling exhibition or combo moves. He just wants to use his leverage as a guy who, Tommy, the one thing with Tommy is he doesn't have a really strong base. So he gets knocked around sometimes on rebounds. He gets knocked around sometimes in the post. Mirovich has that. Mirovich can put his body into you. And I think I love that compliment between those two, between Mirovich and Tomislav. I think you can play Mirovich at the 5 a little bit. I think he'll likely slot in more at the 4, and he can space it a little bit. He can step out and shoot it. I think he was 36% this past year, but rebounds outside of his range really well. He's long. I think he's maybe 6'8", 6'9", but I think he has a 7-foot plus wingspan, and he's just a really, really solid piece. And when you look at a guy that is maybe your 7th guy, 6th, 7th, 8th guy, whatever it may be, those are the guys where when you have foul trouble or when you have to really rely on a guy for injuries like that, I don't think they'll miss a beat with a guy like Mirovich because he's played pro and he understands that ecosystem. He understands what's expected of him, and he's played at enough of a high level to understand where he can be efficient. And I think he plays to that, and I think he's tough too. I think that's kind of his calling card as well, and they need that. So there's some pro talk for him as well. Certainly, I don't think it's going to be this year, but down the road, just his ability to make be a multi-read kind of guy as well, and this read and react type of offense is huge. So yeah, I mean that's we're talking about 6, 7, 8 guys now that I think you can see why I'm pretty bullish on Illinois as a top 15 preseason team that can really hit. If they like last year, if they were pedestrian from outside from 3, they were a top 5 offense in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And then this year I think they're going to be a better shooting team. And I think Mirovich is going to contribute heavily to them wanting to maintain the level of rebounding that they had last year to try to win those margins.
14th on offense last year on KenPom, 3rd the year before, which just makes me think when we talk about all of the tantalizing upside with this offense, that defense is really part of what it boils down to with the team reaching its ceiling. I see you brought in Cameron Crocker, who was the defensive coordinator or he's now the defensive coordinator. He came from Colgate. Do you expect his addition to change anything stylistically? You mentioned forcing more turnovers, obviously one of the lowest turnover rates in the country the last 2 years. And the other thing that I'm including in this question is in Illinois, in Brad's tenure at Illinois, the block rate has been outside the top 175, except for 2023. It was top 10. That was with like Dane Danger,
Matthew Meyer
blocking shots. I'm just thinking with Big Z and just having more optionality, like you said, in the front court, that could, the drop coverage could be played more effectively there. And then maybe you're able to mix in some other looks to force some more turnovers. What are you expecting defensively to be different or better this year?
Yeah. I mean, I think I look at how cyclical basketball is and how a lot trickles down from the NBA. And part of it is you want these teams to play up against the shot clock, like as much as you can. Pacers, Thunder, pressure you full court. It doesn't have to be like a legitimate press. You don't have to run like a 2-2-1 token press, but can you at least, is a team getting in their offense at 22 seconds instead of 26? Right? That's like all that makes a difference because it throws off timing of your offense and where's the pickup point. I think they're going to do a little bit more pressuring in the backcourt this year. I think you need to be. I wonder because they were live and die by drop these last 5 years or so. Mm-hmm. They didn't care if teams hit 17 pull-up jumpers on them. They did not care. They stuck with it. And I think teams are getting into the habit more and more of forming their offense around getting into the paint and being fine with shooting those and getting confident shooting those mid-range floaters because they're going to be there. So how do you combat that? And I think the way you combat that and the way Illinois can combat that is they need to mix in more pressure. And that's going to force more turnovers. They tried it a little bit last year with some of these stabs being up to touch on the ball, but that's something you have to really work in the offseason on too. And then I just wonder, like, I watched more than any year this year in the NBA playoffs, team zoned more than any year. Like it's, I mean, Denver almost exclusively did it, because when you look at having Petravic on the floor or any of these guys you look at as a weakest link defensively, that's what basketball has become. Basketball has become a weakest link game because, teams are just going to formulate their offense around attacking, getting into a switch. Who's the guy we want to hunt, as people call it? And how do you combat that? Well, you combat that by zoning, because you want to keep guys in certain areas where they can't just dribble over and pick on you. So I wonder if that's what they mix in. I certainly think there's going to be more pressure this year for them to force more turnovers, because if you want to play fast, that's just another way to do it, is not have to rely solely on your defensive rebounding or getting the ball out of the net to go and run. You want to get those fast break opportunities from pressuring and turning the ball over. Like 360th nationally in turnover rate. It's now you're putting so much strain on your rebounding to win that margin at a high level like they did last year, because you're not turning teams over. So I think if you're going to take a step back in rebounding this year, which I think they might, you also have to start turning teams over a little bit more. So just a few ways I think they can work that in.
Creighton, one of the only other teams in the country the last few years who's been able to get away with such a low turnover percentage, but like Ryan Kalkbrenner was also one defensive player of the year every year. So if you don't have that, it's harder.
You don't want him away from the rim, right? It's like, it's the best formula for them, because you want your rim protector by the rim. And that to me, that makes total sense.
Last thing, I mean, Jake Davis probably mixed in there as a depth piece. Is there anyone I should have asked you about? Ty Rodgers is hurt. Is Brandon Lee going to factor in here?
I think star? Brandon Lee, the thing with Brandon Lee is Brandon Lee guards. And so if there is the easiest way for a coach to send a message on a team, if a team's struggling defensively, is to play a guy that you wouldn't expect to be maybe in that top 7 or 8 in the rotation, is to put that guy on the floor because he guards. And I think if there's a scenario where Brandon Lee gets on the floor, that's going to be the reason. Now he could get on and have, I'm sure he'll play a little bit in non-conference and stuff. But once Big Ten play rolls around, and I listened to Field 68 just went to Kentucky. I mean, this is the point of the year where everybody talks about depth. And we can go 12 deep, we can go 11 deep. Yeah, great. It's going to be 8 or 9. It's just like it's going to be 8 or 9, because people, like, you can look and say, like, for Brandon Lee, I think Brandon Lee's a good player, but at some point it's like, where are the minutes? Because Tommy's going to play 28 minutes a game. Kylan's going to, you cannot take Kylan off the floor. Kylan's going to play 33 minutes a game. Stojakovic is going to play 30 minutes a game. And now you start really, I think Waggler's a hell of a player. And you just keep going down. I didn't even mention Petravic, Mirovich, the other Avicic. Like there's so many mouths to feed from a minute standpoint that I think he may end up being, and Jake Davis too, may end up being a casualty of that. But those two guys that you mentioned, Davis and Lee, can see the floor in different ways, because one guards at a high level, and Jake Davis is tough as hell. Like, Jake Davis will get on the floor because of his toughness, and Jake Davis knows exactly what his role is. That can also get you on the floor. He just wants to space. He just wants to shoot threes, be a mover, be a screener, fight, crash the glass. That's it. And there's a lot of value in that. So I think those two guys won't see a ton of minutes, but you never know. You never know given the different scenarios.
There you have it. Illinois looks like a fun team this year. I'm excited to see, Stojakovic in this environment. I'm excited to see what Keaton Waggler brings to the table. I think it's going to be a team that's really fun to watch this year. So thank you, Mike, for breaking it down with me.
No problem, man. I appreciate you having me on.